not used to doing this with only one screen. So give me, actually, I'm trying to figure out. I'm actually in the office today, so if anybody's in here, stop in and say hey. Everybody see that okay? What about now? Still good?
Looks good.
All right, you guys don't see yourselves? Like I can see you guys on the right, but you don't see yourselves, right?
Right.
No? Okay, cool.
I see you and just how to complete a CMA.
All right, awesome. Sounds good. All right, so this class I made a few modifications to, and yet you will see throughout that it follows a similar class that I did a few months back on, and the title of it was The Difference Between a Market Analysis and an Appraisal. So I definitely am going to touch on those things because especially in an appreciating market that we're in, and to be honest with you, so as someone who's been licensed since 04, and I think I saw Bob Donegan in here, he's been in real estate since I think I was born. And so he might have even more to say, but I believe that this market is probably the largest amount of appreciation year over year that we may have ever had in Columbus. And so it's going to be super important as we talk through how to complete a market analysis, is not just to pay attention to what we can get a buyer to pay for it, but also what it's going to actually appraise for. Because our job as an agent is not just to get the highest contract price, it's to get the seller the most amount of money at the closing table, assuming that's the seller's goal. And so I really want to make sure we touch on that, so I intend to do that. So let's go ahead and jump right in if that's okay with everybody. And what I thought we could start with is just what is a CMA? And I guess this is my definition. I didn't look up Webster's or anything, which I probably should have done, but it stands for Comparative Market Analysis. So basically, we're looking at a subject property and comparing it to the market. And what is the purpose of a CMA in the real estate sale? It's to determine the home or condo's value in today's market based on the best available data. So that leads me to, what is a CMA not? It's not the seller's opinion of the price. It's not the proof of forever value. And that's the big one I want to get. You know, a lot of times when you're meeting with sellers, and for those of you who are in the productivity coaching program, I did a lead generation class on Saturday, and we talked about, you know, doing CMAs as a way to possibly generate new business or referrals. And I always like to preface to clients when I'm sitting in front of them, sellers talking about the value of their home, that this is their value today. You know, I lived through 2008 as an agent, and the value of their house in 2007 was not the same as the value of their house in 2009, and it wasn't going in the right direction. So nowadays it's the opposite, right? Usually what it is today is less than what it's going to be in a couple months. And yet they need to understand that this is just a snapshot in time. And the last thing that a CMA is not, it's not a guarantee of value. So this is an opinion, just like an appraisal is an opinion. It's not a guarantee. And so we have to make sure that we, you know, this is our professional opinion, but it's definitely not a guarantee. So in my opinion, the main goals of a market analysis is two things. Number one, you want to determine what a buyer will pay for the home in today's market. And so again, hammering the point about being a snapshot in time. And then number two, it's determine what an appraisal will think the value is in today's market. And this is very, very important. I unfortunately am dealing with a cut appraisal right now, and it's $15,000 cut appraisal. And so, you know, we have to deal with that in a market that's appreciating over the last several months. When you look at like October, November, and December year over year, it's like basically 10 to 15% appreciation. you know, appraisers are looking back 3, 4, 5 months and pulling comps in that support a much lower price than what the market demands now. And so we have to be cognizant of that as we're talking about price. So when I'm doing a market analysis, the first thing, so I like to think of a market analysis as basically I want to look at the overall market, because we have to understand what the trend of the overall market is before we can talk about, again, what the future is. Because every once in a while you're going to get that call, right, where it's like, hey, I need to sell my house next week. And yet the reality is, for those of you on the call that have been in the business for a long time, you know, usually when you get a call from a seller, it's, hey, you know, we're thinking about selling. And then you ask, well, when are you thinking about it? Well, we think in the spring. You know, we're thinking, like, I've been on 2 appointments last week where it's like they want to make sure that they don't move before their kids get out of school. Well, you know, we have to know what the trend of the market is so we can do our best to predict, well, this is what it's worth today, but what do we think it's going to be next, you know, 3 months from now? And so this is a snapshot from Trend Graphics. For those of you that are newer in the business, this is something you can find the login for on kwcresources.com. But this is a great tool, and this is what I always start my market analysis with. And that is, at least when I get to the pricing part of the listing presentation, I'm going to be talking about, okay, this is what the trend is. And so in this graph, it's showing the light green lines are going to be your for sale properties in a given month. The dark green is the sold. And then your red line are the number in contract, and your blue line are the number of new listings. And the reason why this is important is because when we have that conversation about, okay, today it's January. So if we come down here and look at January, we see that last January, there were, you know, 3,200 houses for sale in the whole market. And then there were 1,850 solds. Okay. But if we go back, because obviously we're not through January yet, so we don't have those final numbers. If we look back at December of last year, we had 3,755 actives, 2,500 solds. This December, we had 1,800 actives and 2,700 sold. So we had basically almost half the number of active listings, but we had more closings. So who wants to take a stab at what that means to a seller? Come on now. I've got some people on this call that have sold a lot of houses. Come on. Kendra?
To sell now.
Yeah, it's a very low inventory environment. So in 2010 and 11, when the market was down, you know, we were looking at, you know, inventory levels, you know, you would expect like a 4 to 6 month time on market a lot of times. Now, what this graph is telling us is that we expect more homes to sell in a month than are available for sale. And then remember, this blue line is the new listings. So more homes sold than new listings came on the market. So that theoretically means that there's less than 1 month of inventory. Does anybody know what the National Association of Realtors considers a balanced market in terms of number of months of inventory?
Is it 6 to 7?
You got it. Bob said it too. 6 months. So if we have less than 1 month of inventory and the National Association of Realtors considers a balanced market 6 months, that means we're in an extreme seller's market. And so then you can go into what does that mean to them as the seller in terms of control and different things. And that's not what we're in this class necessarily to do. But I'm going through this exercises. You want to use, and I get geeked out by numbers, so I probably go into this a lot more than most agents do. And yet I think as a newer agent or an agent in general, I think this is a way that you can really separate yourself from a lot of other agents by being very knowledgeable. And especially if you're new or maybe just digging in full time, you know, taking an hour a week to study this graph and understand what this means up here. And then also this today's stats down here at the bottom, where it's talking about, okay, the month of January last year compared to the month of January this year, what does that look like? What's down, what's up? When you can intelligently talk about that, and for those of you who are very experienced on the call, when you know what you're talking about, guess what you get a lot fewer of? Questions and objections. So the biggest fear that I hear from new agents is always like, well, what happens if they ask me a question I don't know the answer to? Well, the cool thing is if you go in there like you own the place and you own the information that you want to tell them, and you're so confident in that information and how it relates to their situation, they feel like whatever questions they did have must not matter because you're not worried about it. And so understanding this stuff, so you don't have to know how to explain every single number on here. I've literally never had somebody ask me a question about anything on here, because when I say 2 or 3 reasons or 2 or 3 definitions of what this thing means, they're like, oh, that's cool. And guess what? Half the time I write it out on here, what exactly I want to say to them. So you don't even have to memorize it. Just go through and understand it to the level that you can write a note to yourself and then just point at your note. Hey, this big green, dark green line means that there's more homes that sold than the light green line than were for sale. And you could draw a line that points to the different lines to remind yourself, you know, I mean, a lot of times I think people overdo it, but so that's the first step. The next step, and so the next conversation is, okay, this is what the overall market is doing. Now let's drill down into what our specific home is, so we can look at the neighborhood that we're trying to sell in and what's going on in that neighborhood. So quick question, what do buyers care about? Like if you guys had to think through what do buyers care about, I already gave you the sheet there with granite countertops as an example, but what else do you guys feel like buyers care about?
Acreage.
Acreage is one, yep.
Open concept.
Open concept, yep.
School district.
School district, good.
Turnkey.
Floors,
Condition, turnkey, yep. Finding a home to buy, that's a good one, Bob.
hardwood floors,
Yep,
New appliances.
definitely. So I'm going to go through my list in here, but I think we're all kind of along the same lines: finished basement, wood versus laminate, all of that thing. And then the big question that so many of you that have worked with a lot of buyers probably hear is, how does this compare to the one that I missed out on that I wish I would have offered $5,000 more for and won the multiple offers? And so that's what the buyer's thinking about. They're thinking about, right, how are they going to live? Like, what's that feeling going to be when they're making dinner for their family at that house? And how impressed are their friends going to be? And how is this going to be functional for my family? And the reality is almost none of those things fall into the appraiser's list of what they care about. So the appraisers care about square footage. Did you guys know that every appraiser is required to actually measure the house at the appraisal? So they don't, now maybe some of them stretch the truth, but the good ones are going to go in and actually measure it. So they're not supposed to just look at the auditor's site and write down the square footage. They measure it. How many bedrooms? And they kind of care about that, and I can get into that later. How many bathrooms? What's the basement size, finished or unfinished? But they don't care about whether it's finished with stone columns around the poles. They only care if it's finished. The word finished is all that appears on that appraisal. And then number of garage spaces. And then the biggest thing that differentiates appraisers from buyers is that buyers are comparing the properties that are currently on the market that they walked through before this house. The appraiser is comparing it to homes that have already sold. And so that's going back to, you know, the appreciating market and the fact that the buyer and the appraiser are actually looking at two different things. So when we're looking at pricing, this is where I'm going. So remember, we started with the broad market, and then I always say, now we're going to zoom into your neighborhood. So we're going to look at, from a status perspective, it's going to be the active, the contingent, the pending, and the sold. And if you guys have done much in the MLS, you know that when you select the under contract or the contingent, pending, and sold, the little days pop up and it gives you the chance to say like it's 366 days or whatever. So you want to look back at the last 12 months in most cases. Now, I will say in this particular time, again, I think there's pre-COVID pricing and post-COVID pricing. Definitely, we saw an enormous jump in prices starting in May of last year. Like I said, some year over year appreciation was as much as 15% or more in some cases. So make sure that even though you're looking back 12 months to get a big enough sample size, you always want to pay attention to when it sold. And I would say if it sold before May of last year, I would take it with a grain of salt because it doesn't really represent the market that we're in now.
Frank, can I ask a question really quick? I was talking to my brother who's licensed in North Carolina, and he said in the market we're in right now, he wouldn't even go back further than 3 or 6 months to do CMAs. What's your opinion on that?
I agree completely. So the only reason I go back 12 is there's a couple reasons. Number one, if you're zoomed into just a neighborhood, you are, which is what most appraisers use as a guideline, you are 3 to 6 months. Like, for example, I just did a pricing update for one of my past clients last week, and there hasn't been there was like a flurry of sales last year in the first quarter in his neighborhood that were exactly like his. And since then, nothing in his size range has sold. And so if you looked at 3 to 6 months, you would have no good comps. And an appraiser is going to go back 12 months, and really they're allowed to go back as much as 24 months if they haven't found something. And it takes a lot for them to go outside of a neighborhood. So I agree with him. And if I have 2 or 3 sales that all are what I would consider comparable, then I would definitely put heavy emphasis on the ones that sold most recently. But I think sometimes in order to get a sample size that's viable, you have to go back 12, if that makes sense. So again, the next thing is the area and subdivision. Now, what I will tell you is that there are some subdivisions that have more than one school district. So what I did, and this is probably another tips and tricks class for the MLS, but there's a way that you can change your view so that when you're searching the MLS, it shows you the school district in the list view. So the first thing I'm doing when I draw around the subdivision is I'm looking at all of those like major things, because there's, for example, there's a couple there's actually a neighborhood, an area in Dublin and another one in the Westerville zip code that is in the like right between Westerville and New Albany, but it's Columbus schools. And then there's also an area in Dublin that's Columbus schools, but Dublin city. So a lot of consumers search by the city name, and they assume that anything that's in Dublin is going to be Dublin schools. And then all of a sudden this house comes up and they fall in love with it because it's really cheap compared to what else they looked at. And that's because it was in Columbus schools. So school district definitely matters in pricing. And that's something that you want to make sure. If the subdivision, Emily, to your point, doesn't have any sales that are very recent, I definitely will try to find other subdivisions within a mile or two of that subdivision that have had recent sales, just to see if, if we can find anything that's comparable. But I'm always going to do my best to stay within that subdivision. And rural properties are their own animal altogether. But when you get very rural, you really usually have to go out like 5 to 10 miles a lot of times to find stuff. And then again, I would just heavily weight the comparable properties that are nearest to it. And I would also pay very close attention to school district, because oftentimes school district is going to matter. And if you're doing a rural property and you have no experience or knowledge about the area, I would strongly consider posting something in the Facebook page or asking somebody in the office, hey, who do you know that sold some property in that area? And just make sure, maybe have a 5-minute conversation about, which school districts are good. Like, for example, out in like the Plain City, Marysville area, Fairbanks School District, which most people, if you've never looked out there, would never have heard of, but that's actually like the highest regarded school district in the Northwest rural, like in the Marysville area. But if you've never sold anything out there, you would have no idea that Fairbanks schools are worth significantly more for the same house than in Marysville schools. So it's definitely something that you want to pay attention to. The other thing that would probably be equal to, or the next thing that I would consider, would definitely be the style. And the biggest reason for that is the different styles. Number one, they live different, as you guys most of you probably enjoy, at least to some degree, looking at houses. Some of you may be in real estate because you love looking at houses. But what you know is that different floor plans live differently. And so the value of them from a pricing perspective is something that you need to look at. I usually like to start with the broader view of the whole neighborhood to at least establish the maximum and minimum prices in the neighborhood. And then as long as there's enough to look at, I'm going to drill down. Like if you have a ranch, it's going to take a lot for an appraiser to compare it to a 2-story. And honestly, there's a lot of buyers out there that only look at ranches. If you have a buy level, there's a lot of buyers that, if given the opportunity, would not choose a buy level. So you're going to have to, if the neighbor sold for $250 and they're a ranch and you have a buy level that's the same square footage, you're probably not selling it for $250. And so you need to pay attention to that. And my advice would be to compare it whenever possible to the same style, because the appraisers are going to too. Obviously, then you have square footage. So this is going to be a bracketed thing that you're going to be looking at. So typically, depending on the size, I think one time I heard an appraiser say they like to be like within 10 to 20% of the subject property. So obviously, the higher in square footage you go in terms of the size of the home, the broader the range. But you really want to pay attention if you're in a typical subdivision. I would say, under 500,000. So there's not going to be really any custom homes in there. Most of the time, if you're in what used to be Dominion and now Pulte or MI or any of those types, there's going to be properties that are the exact same floor plan that have sold in that neighborhood within the last 12 months. So you're going to be using square footage to easily identify the ones that are going to be closest. And then you're going to dig into the pictures to try to see if those are the same square footage. Then you're going to start considerations of bedrooms and bathrooms. Is the basement finished or not finished? Full versus partial. Like I said, basement or no basement. I have a funny story about that. I think it was my first listing appointment back from being the team leader over the summer. The house that these people were selling was a model home. It was in Blacklick. And so when I heard model, being an agent that of course knows so much that they don't have to look up the information, I heard model home. I'm like, oh, well, who would ever have a model home in a neighborhood with basements and no basements and not have it have a basement? Like, that would be so stupid. So I did all my pricing, purposely took out all the properties that had no basement, showed up to the house, very ready to do a CMA on this house and tell them how much their house was worth so much money, and did my walkthrough and opened the door to the closet, and there sat the furnace and hot water tank on the first floor. Oh, why isn't this in the basement? Oh, we don't have a basement. So that was a fun, I figured out a way to get around it, and we ended up selling the house. But I basically had to tell them, well, I'm pretty sure. And I just told them straight up, I was like, I thought for sure that you had a basement. So I can give you a good idea, but I'm going to have to get back to you here when I get back to the house to give you a for sure price. So just always make sure you ask the right questions. And then last thing you are going to consider, which sometimes could be the most important, is going to be the condition and finishes. And so we'll dig into that. And so this is actually, I guess I lied. The last thing is going to be the lot size and location. Again, another MLS hack. Once you've chosen the properties that you think are most comparable, you can go into the MLS and look under, if you click the map, so you have a list of properties, you click the map button, which is like kind of the upper right. It goes like edit, search, list, detail, and then map, I believe. If you click the map, then you can actually go down the left-hand column, click the little satellite view. So you're looking at the satellite view, and go down the left-hand column and look at each property, and it'll zoom in on each property. So you can see, does it back up to power lines? Does it back up to a railroad track? Does it back up to a busy street? All of those things could potentially be a marketability issue. In our current market, you have a lot of leeway with that stuff, but in 2011, Joan, how long would a property that backed up to the railroad tracks sit on the market? Or the better question is, how low would you have to go in price to make it something that somebody would buy?
It would stay on the market for a long time.
Yeah, because there were 8 other houses available in the neighborhood for them to buy. So why would you choose to back up to the railroad tracks? So again, those are all things that, you want to be paying attention to. So I just went through a ton of information. Does anybody have any questions? Anything that I've got some pretty experienced agents on here. Anything that you guys disagree with or do that I don't do?
Troy, what do you use? What do you think appraisers give for $1 per square foot on a finished basement? Or is that not $1 per square foot calculation when they're appraising the home?
Yeah, it varies, but I would say it's anywhere from $10 to $20.
Ooh, that's low. Okay.
To be honest, even on above ground square footage lately, it's like 30 to 40 bucks. In terms
like
of
a split level?
No, I mean, like, if you have a 2-story and the subject is 2,500 square feet and the comp is 2,800 square feet, first of all, that's just over 10% difference. So usually within 10%, they'll make no adjustment. And if they might make an adjustment of, again, let's call it $30 per square foot, so 300. So they would do a $9,000 adjustment, maybe. Is that math right?
I don't add that quickly.
No. Is that right, Bob?
He walked away for a minute.
Oh, he walked away. I think I heard him yell because he's in the office 2 down from me. But anyways, somewhere around there. So it's not going to be an enormous difference for you. And like I said, if you're within 10 to 20% of the square footage, they're not going to make any adjustment at all. So a lot of agents, I would say, and thank you for bringing that up, Krista, because I think a lot of agents, especially when they're new, they go onto the to the MLS and they're like, oh, you print off the one line CMA and see what the price per square foot was of the sold, and then you just apply that to your square footage. And especially if the place that you're comparing it to is smaller than yours, usually the price per square foot is higher on smaller properties and lower on larger properties. So the neighborhood likes to bring you to the average. So usually the largest property in a neighborhood is going to sell for the smallest price per square foot, and the smallest property is going to sell for the highest price per square foot in general. Obviously, there's other factors that go along with it, but you have to be very, very careful saying because this property is 200 square feet larger and the average price per square foot, let's just say, is 100 per square foot, that this is going to be worth $20,000 more.
Right, because no matter how small it is or how large it is, it has to have toilets, it has to have cabinets, it has to have carpeting or whatever. You just, how big of a size is it, you know? So
Yeah.
learn that in new homes long
And
time
so
ago.
that's the reason why it's really important to try to find properties that are as similar as you can, as you can get.
Troy, I have a question.
Yep.
How far away can you go? Like, let's just say you're in a neighborhood that's kind of small, like Brookside Village, which is kind of at the corner of like Smoky Row and Snowfer. There's only 110 houses back there. So doing your CMA and concerned about the appraiser, like how many miles away can you go to get your comps?
Yeah, usually when I'm doing that, so the rule of thumb I've always heard from appraisers is within 2 miles. And they just seem to be very reluctant to go outside the neighborhood, in my experience. If anybody else has experience different, I would love to hear it. But they're going to pay special attention. The other thing is even if they're willing to put it on the appraisal report, if you've ever had either gotten your buyer's appraisal or had the pleasure of a cut appraisal on your listing, you'll see that they do a commentary in there and they talk about all of the factors as to why they picked the comps that they did. And then also they may say something like, comp number 4 is very similar, but it's in a different neighborhood. So I weighted that much less than comp number 2. So even if they have to go outside the neighborhood to get comps, I would pay very, very close attention to what the high and low, they call it the price bracket of the neighborhood is. And you're going to struggle to get above the ceiling of that neighborhood, even if there's not good comps. So usually what I'll do in that situation is go back 2 years in that neighborhood and try to see if there was anything 2 years back, just to try to find that price bracket. Then I would go out 2 miles and I would look for properties that are kind of in the range I think it's worth, that are also built around the same time. So the neighborhoods are very similar, if that makes sense.
It does. I think it gets tricky because in Brookside Village last year, I had a house that went over 300 by $15,000. It was the first house back there that had.
Mm-hmm.
So my seller was very nervous about the appraisal. Someone had bid it up to 337, but they had, actually that's what it was. They had bid it up to 337, but they didn't waive any appraisal. The 315 people said they'd pay up to 310, and it appraised at 310. It did not appraise at 315.
Yeah.
So just like you said, that you think getting them the most amount of money is what they want. What they really want is the most amount of money at closing. And there could be a big difference in this market between what someone's willing to pay and what a bank is willing to lend you.
100%. Yeah. It could be a huge difference. And so, Yeah, you absolutely. And that's what that's the first thing I say before I start the pricing conversation is, you know, I feel like my job as your agent is to get you to the closing table with as much money as possible while also achieving your other goals. So one quick thing, it has nothing to do with the class, but you should always make sure you understand what the seller really wants, because not every seller cares most about price. And actually, a lot of them don't care. Price is not their number one concern. It could be that if they don't get their house sold in the next, 60 days, that one of them is going to have to live in California with the kids and the other one's going to be stuck back here. Or that, when as we approach the end of the school year, that their kids are going to have to move in the middle of school, or all of those types of things. Now, certainly, if they can achieve all those other goals and still get an amazing price, no one's saying no. And yet I know lots of people who have lost out on listing opportunities because they didn't ask the right questions, and they went in assuming that the only thing the seller wanted was the most amount of money, and somebody else came in and learned about them, their story, and what their needs were, and they were able to take the listing because they were able to formulate the conversation, drive the conversation around what the seller wanted instead of what they thought the seller wanted. So just always remember that. But once the seller chooses a price, once you as the agent and the seller agree on a price, 100% our job is to get them the most amount of money at the closing table. So the last final steps here, I already talked about that stuff. Then we're going to select the properties that are most like the subject, and then review photos, details, upgrades. So I'm still like, most people probably that know me well would consider me very technologically leaning. And yet I still do my CMAs the old school way. I still print them all off. So I print the CR full report and the photo report. So the photos go on the back page and the information on the front page, and I highlight everything in terms of the upgrades, and I make notes like this one has a new deck, it has new kitchen, blah 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 blah, and then I put them in order of importance, and then I go through those with the client there at the property. I've tried to do it electronically. I've done it many times that way before. But I feel like there's a value to a lot of people in being able to see it on paper. And honestly, it helps me because, like I was saying earlier, I can cheat. If I write all my notes, then that means I don't forget things. So, and then the last thing I do is I also print all the neighborhood, the entire neighborhood. So even if I've narrowed the comps into like ranch properties, I'll print the every house that's sold in the neighborhood on what's called the one-line CMA. So if you go on the MLS and click the CMA button, and there's a drop down with several options, it's called the one-line CMA. And the reason I do that is because one time, I was going to do a market analysis on a ranch, and the client was like, hey, a 2-story just sold 2 months ago right next door. And because it wasn't a ranch, I didn't have it on my information. So I always like to be prepared to talk at least generally about any property that's sold over the last 12 months, just in case they ask about it. And then I'll have that at least like the bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, style, list price, sales price, all that stuff is on the one-line CMA. So I can at least look at that and say like, well, here's the reason why I didn't include this as a comparable. It sold 11 months ago versus this one that sold 2 months ago. Or you have 3 bedrooms and that had 5 bedrooms, or whatever the case may be. All right, so I talked about pre-COVID versus post-COVID pricing. I talked about a lot of this stuff already. So this is now moving on to what do appraisers care about. So
wait, what's post-COVID? What timeline is that one?
That's like basically anything that closed after May has seen substantial appreciation. Like if you go,
Okay.
like for example, over the summer, I sold a ranch in Gahanna for $255. And if I would have listed that property in January, I probably would have listed it for $205.
Wow.
I just did a market analysis for a client of mine that I met in August, and the three most recent sales, which were all similar size, increased my suggested list price to them by $30,000 since August, and they've done nothing to their house. So so those, it's probably now like just, yeah, it's still post-COVID still. But like Emily said, though, I would say you better be paying special attention to the closing date, even if you're looking within 12 months, because there can be a really big difference between something that closed in November or December versus even June or July this year. All right, so what do appraisers care about? So what I did was I went and pulled an investment property that I bought just so I can stay compliant. I'm agreeing to share my information with you and not somebody else's. But I wanted to give you guys this example because if you've never looked at an appraisal before, you may not understand how purely data-driven appraisals are. And so I like to bring this up I don't print these off. You could, but I like to bring this up at the listing appointment, because I always say nowhere on the appraisal does it say you have new countertops, new cabinets, that you put in, that you finished your basement. I mean, there is a place where it shows finished. So like the basement area, this is what, can you guys see my cursor, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So this area tells you how many square feet are in the basement and then how much is finished. So this property is in Wineland Park downtown. Nobody has finished basements, or very few people have finished basements. But really condition wise, this grading right here of C1 through C6 is going to be the most important one that could potentially change based on upgrades that you've done. But I'll be honest, in a suburban neighborhood, which is probably where a lot of us are selling, the condition adjustment doesn't happen very often. I don't know, for those of you that are on this call that have sold a lot of houses, or even if you've only sold a couple, but you've seen a condition adjustment, has anybody seen that? And if so, how much was that? And how frequent do you see that? Nobody?
I
Okay.
don't think I've seen it.
Yeah, it doesn't happen often at all. So this is what I use though to explain to people, hey, this is absolutely, you have to understand that what the buyers are looking for is one piece, but what the appraiser is looking for is another. And you've got this quality of construction, which is kind of like the condition. You've got design on here, or style, like I talked about. So that's why you're rarely going to see a 2-story get compared to a ranch. You've got what they call the view. So just so you know, this is a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac appraisal. So anytime somebody's doing FHA or conventional financing, this is typically the form that it's going to be on. So it's literally fill in the blank for the appraiser. Then you've got lot size, you've got the type of property, and then the location. So you've got location and then also view. So recently I had an appraisal and it said wooded. And then if the subjects aren't wooded, or if the comparables aren't wooded, then they'll make an adjustment one way or the other. And then here you've got the type of financing that it was, whether there were seller concessions. Sometimes, usually they'll make adjustments, but they have to get a hold of the agent to get this information. And then here's where you've got the price per square foot, Krissa. So you can see they break out the price per square foot here. So, so you can see like this price per square foot, this was what, 70 square feet larger, and they did 0 adjustment. So that was within that range. And then when you do look at this one, this was 100 square feet less, 0 adjustment. So then they have the bedrooms and bathrooms, and you can see, so this one had an extra half bath. He gave it $4,000, or he gave, no, I'm sorry. This one had one less bedroom. So it went from 3 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms. So he gave us a $4,000 credit for the extra bedroom. This one we had 2 full baths versus 1.5. So he gave us 1,000. This is 2 bedrooms and 1 bath versus 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. So he made a $5,000 adjustment. Now this was a lower price property, but you guys kind of get the point here with regards to the adjustments. It would cost you a lot more than $5,000 to add a bedroom and a bathroom to a house, but they only gave a $5,000 adjustment. So it's not, you know, the difference between a 2-car garage and no garage was $8,000. Well, you can't build a 2-car garage for $8,000. So just know that anything, you're not getting like the rebuild cost or the add-on cost with an appraisal. And then they add up all the adjustments and then they total here. And the appraiser's goal is to find the properties that have the smallest adjustment in either direction. So the more adjustments they have to make, the less weight that they're going to put on that property. And so then the next page is where they explain why they did what they did. So, so this one, again, we purchased as a foreclosure and fixed it up. And it says the increase in values attributed to the subject being purchased as a bank foreclosure. And then it talks, they have to explain that all sales are closed and considered to be representative of the current market. And they explain when something is over 6 months old, why they still used it, but that there's no time adjustments that are warranted. And then they address quality and condition. And then basically just say all those things that I already said. But he said, because all of the ranges are close and because they're all close to each other, they were all considered in the opinion. Does all of that make sense? I know I just went through a ton of numbers. For those of you that aren't numbers people, your eyes are probably glazed over. Does anybody have any questions on this stuff?
Troy, I have a question. So what you're looking at is like an appraisal, but often we don't see these appraisals as we're putting together the CMA. Is that correct?
Yeah, usually you don't have an appraisal report to look at.
Okay.
So the purpose of going through this is to show you that as an agent, you need to be thinking about 2 things. Number 1, you need to be thinking about what a buyer is willing to pay for it. But number 2, you need to be thinking about what an appraiser would be willing to appraise it for.
Right.
Because oftentimes those are 2 different things.
Yes.
But the only way that you can figure out what you approximately think the appraisal is going to come in at is by understanding what they're actually looking at.
Okay.
Can you go back to page 1 of your appraisal?
Yes, I think so.
Previous slide.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. With Zoom, it like overlays all my buttons. So let me just do it this way. All right.
Great.
No, that didn't help me. All right. Can't I do it from?
But I can see what I want to ask you on this one.
Okay.
Comp number 2.
Yep.
Under description, arm's length, FHA 2,500. What was that 2,500?
Because that price included 2,500 in seller closing costs. So really, if the seller hadn't paid closing costs, then it would have been 121.
Got it. So the seller had agreed to pay $2,500 of the buyer's closing costs.
Correct.
So this was from a while ago.
This was a closed yeah, exactly. For those of you that have been in the business for less than 4 years, you're like, sellers pay closing costs?
Is that possible?
Is
Okay.
that a real thing? Yeah, it was a real thing. It was like basically you didn't write an offer without including that before.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? No? All right, cool.
Troy,
Yeah.
I do have a question. On those HUD properties, if you do get a cut appraisal, how do they handle that?
Like a HUD, like a bank owned?
Bank owned or repossession?
It's very rare because
Okay,
honestly, they're usually priced well below market.
okay.
So I would say that it's very rare. I don't think I've ever had one. The bigger issue with HUD properties, and I'm actually closing on an investment property myself tomorrow, and it's not in the greatest shape. And the appraiser ended up coming back with a couple things that they wanted us to fix. Really the underwriter pushed the appraiser, and then but ultimately they needed us to fix a couple stupid things. So I would say that's more likely than having a cut value. Back in the day, probably short sales sometimes fell into that because they were selling, for too much, but usually they're the ones driving everybody else's prices down, not the other way around.
Yeah. I had another thought while you're just talking about the amount of listings that are active today. And so I'm thinking in the Columbus Realtors, we have what, like 8,800 members?
Mhm.
So if half of those members got a new listing in a week, we would double our inventory.
Yeah, more than double it. Yeah.
Simple.
Simple, not easy, right?
I know. Oh, well.
All right. So how to price in today's current market. So you do want to pay really special attention to the actives and in contracts because of the fact that prices are going up so much. And yet you still do have to keep in mind the solds. But I always, when I'm pricing, I want to find out two things if something's in contract. Number one, I want to find out when it's supposed to close, because remember, appraisers don't look at anything unless it's closed usually. And number two is I want to find out, are they through appraisal? And then obviously I try to find out what it's listed at also, or what it's in contract for, because sometimes list price isn't indicative of what it's in contract for. We only want to look in the same neighborhood, and we also can't ignore low priced homes. So like I was saying earlier to Teresa, definitely the low price, just because something's priced low doesn't mean it's not going to be considered by the appraiser. The style, square footage, basement, no basement, deck, patio is something that we haven't really touched on, but it's definitely something that you need to consider. And then location, the yard size, location within the subdivision, and also the lot size are also things that you need to be paying attention to. And we kind of went through this before, what to do if there's no neighborhood comps. Go back more than 12 months, look at expireds and withdrawns, and then look at the same style, same price range, same school district, and see if there's anything else in the area. Sometimes too, in any market, what I'll do is once I have like a range that I'm looking for, I will actually go search that same either zip code or school district and just say like, show me everything that's currently in contract and active between 250 and 275, because that's what our competition is going to be once we go on the market. And this is me just dating myself, which I've already done a bunch of times, but I grew up in this business during the 2008 collapse. So I never thought I would see the day of the multiple offers, but obviously considerations in order to win an offer on the buyer side is looking at doing as is. So does that mean that you're doing an inspection and just agreeing to not ask for repairs, or does that mean no inspection? And can they terminate the contract still, or is this just for informational purposes? Appraisal gap coverage, somebody had mentioned earlier. And then also some people are going as far as to waive the appraisal, which is, you know, if you can get a lender, sometimes if somebody's putting 20% down, you'll get an appraisal waiver. So that's one thing that you guys may want to consider for a buyer who is struggling to win a multiple offer, is find a lender that will pre-run them through the automated underwriting system and see if they can qualify for that appraisal waiver, where they actually will be able to make the offer saying that they don't have to have an appraisal.
And you were saying that for that to happen, to qualify for it, what are the you have to put so much, 20% down or more?
Usually what I've been seeing is it's 20% down, and then basically the lenders have like an evaluation module, like evaluation model that they plug the address into, and then it determines whether, you know, they think that with the bank's equity position that they're pretty safe based on the other sales in the area. And so there are some lenders that are willing to do that ahead of making an offer, which could put your buyer in a better position by being able to waive the appraisal. Home warranties aren't something we see very often anymore unless the buyer's buying them, but some sellers are still offering them. And then obviously closing in possession as well. All right, real quick, I know I'm over by 3 minutes here, but I wanted to also go over this because I think it's applicable in the listing presentation. So I love this script in that we have to sell your home 5 times. So this is what I always tell sellers. So did you know that I have to sell your home 5 times? So number 1, we have to sell it to the agent. Can anybody guess who number 2 is? No? All right, I'll just run through this since we're in the name of time. So number 1, we have to sell it to the agent. And what I mean by that is you guys are all agents. You have buyers reaching out to you asking to go look at properties. On Friday night at 5 o'clock, when a new listing just came on at 3, are you in a super excited, crazy, ecstatic mood to run out and show a property that is completely overpriced and in crappy condition so your buyer can go look at it and say, I don't really think
Your realtor first or second, right?
So agents are trying to talk your buyers out of going to look at houses if you know that it's not going to be something that works for them. So it needs to be priced right and in good condition. Number 2, you have to sell it to the buyers, right? That's the obvious one, and mom and dad. So remember how you strategize putting your house on the market in terms of, do you accept offers immediately and then risk that mom and dad show up to the home inspection and kill the deal 7 days from now? Or do you hold all offers until Monday so mom and dad can drive down from Cleveland this weekend and kill the deal and you can just go with a different offer? Then we have to sell it to the inspector. The reality is, even though almost everybody's waiving the opportunity to ask for repairs, most people are still doing inspections. So you still have to bring an inspector in there who's hired to find problems. So if you've ever been to a home inspection, you know that the inspector just sits there for 2 hours and tells the buyer all the things that are wrong with the house. So just remember that you want to have it be in good shape, and you want to fix the really major things. But I actually always kind of tell my sellers that if it's not something that's super obvious and it's not a big deal, sometimes I like to leave a few nitpicky things for the inspector to put on the inspection so that he doesn't try to create a problem. Because if you're hired to find problems and you say, I don't find any problems, how does that make you feel as the person that just wrote them a $600 check? Not very good. So, not to say that you want to like hide things, but sometimes like with minor, very minor repair maintenance type items that aren't going to be obvious to the average buyer, meaning it's not going to avoid getting an offer. I sometimes will just say like, you know, if the buyer asks for it, we can take care of it then, but there's no point in spending the money on it now and then, you know, having it not matter to somebody. Even new builds have issues. So if you're representing a buyer on a new build, I would still recommend that they have a home inspection. I've had new builds which are inspected by the city not have insulation put over rooms. I've had water leaks, nails put through shingles, all that stuff. Just because it's a new build doesn't mean that they didn't make any mistakes. The last thing, which we spent a bunch of time, or the fourth thing, which we spent a bunch of time talking about, is we have to sell it to the appraiser. So they need to know why your house is worth what it's worth. So I always like to, once it gets scheduled on my listing, I will send them how many offers we got, how many showings we had, and why in general you feel the house is worth what it is. So if you have updated mechanicals and all kinds of things that separate you, even though that doesn't show up on the appraisal, my goal is to make the appraiser think that our house is at the top end of the market. So they work hard to find homes that support our price versus just like picking them if they know nothing extra about the house. So letting them know. I always steer kind of clear of sending comps because some appraisers get weird about that. They feel like you're trying to tell them they don't know how to do their job. So be careful with that. I also know a lot of agents in this market who are meeting the appraiser at the house. I've done that before and had success with it. If you're really concerned about value, sometimes they could feel really bad about giving you a low value, whereas if they don't know you, you're just another agent. So, you know, buttering them up a little bit is never a bad thing. So if you have a dog to let out there or something like that, that's an easy excuse to hang out. The last one, which most sellers would never guess, is sell it to the underwriter. So for example, my property that I'm closing on tomorrow, I feel very confident after reading the appraisal report that the appraiser did not ask for us to do any repairs, but because the condition was poor, the underwriter wanted everybody to make sure that they knew that they, you know, made us fix things. So we had to install a handrail and fix a couple pieces of messed up soffit, even though literally there's peeling paint all over a house that was built before 1978. So it's never usually going to make sense, but the underwriter has the ability to really kill the deal. So I would say in a shifting market, they scrutinize comps a lot more. So during 2008, 2009, 2010, when the market was going downward, underwriters often would send stuff back to the appraiser and say, hey, this 6-month-old comp isn't valid. I want something more recent because prices were going down. Now they're asking for older stuff to justify their lower prices. Kind of kidding, kind of not. But underwriters ultimately they have to approve the appraisal. So even if the appraisal comes in at an agreeable price, they could say, well, I want to see 2 more comps that support this, or I believe that we should be, you know, doing it at a lower price. And they're going to push the appraiser. And the reality is the bank is the one that's paying them. So oftentimes they're going to win that argument over us. All right, that's all I've got from a slide deck perspective. I know I'm 11 minutes over. Does anybody else have any other questions? Anything I didn't cover? I know we went through a lot.
Thanks, Troy.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for sticking with me.
Yeah, thanks, Troy.
Thank you, Troy.
All right, guys, we'll see you later. Let me know if you need anything.